The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel had seen everything. Royalty, scandal, old money pretending to be new, new money pretending to be old. But at 8:52 on a Thursday evening in October, the room did something it almost never did. It went quiet. Not the polite quiet of a speech beginning, not the rehearsed hush before a toast. This was the kind of silence that falls when something enters a room and the air itself decides to pay attention. Preston Whitfield III noticed it first, because he was the one watching the door. He had been watching it all evening, actually, champagne in hand, Mont Blanc pen tucked into his vest pocket. 7 of his closest friends nearby, all of them in on the joke, all of them waiting. "I invited her," he had said earlier, lowering his voice with the particular satisfaction of a man who has never lost anything. Should be interesting to watch her try to look like she belongs here. They had laughed. Of course they had. But now no one was laughing, because the woman standing in the doorway, in a midnight blue dress that caught the light like still water at dusk, hair pinned low, no jewelry except 2 small pearl earrings that had belonged to her mother, was not trying to look like she belonged. She simply did. She didn't scan the room for familiar faces, didn't hesitate at the threshold, didn't perform the small, anxious adjustments that people make when they feel watched. She walked in the way a person walks when they have already decided, long before arriving, that no one in this room has the authority to define them. Richard Caldwell, my chairman of Caldwell Capital, set down his drink and stood up. He extended his hand. And Savannah Calloway, the woman Preston Whitfield had invited as a joke, shook it. 14 months ago, she had left this world with nothing but a suitcase, $2,800 in her bank account, and a mother fighting cancer in Atlanta. The last good day Savannah Calloway remembered was a Tuesday in August, not because anything extraordinary happened, but because nothing had broken yet. She had arrived at the firm at 7:14 in the morning, 40 minutes before anyone else, the way she always did. The Midtown office on the 32nd floor had that particular stillness she loved, the kind that exists only before the phones start ringing and the politics begin. She set her tote bag on her chair, opened her MacBook Air, and pulled up the rendering she had been refining for 3 weeks. The Hargrove penthouse, Upper East Side, a $2.1 million redesign for a client who had asked for something that feels like the first day of autumn. Savannah knew exactly what that meant. She always did. That was the thing about her, the thing Preston had never fully understood, even after 6 years of marriage. Savannah didn't just design spaces. She translated emotions into rooms. She could sit across from a client for 40 minutes, listen to the way they described their childhood home or their favorite hotel lobby, and walk away knowing exactly which shade of plaster would make them exhale when they walked through the door. It was a gift. Her professors at Parsons had called it instinctive empathy for space. Preston had called it your little decorating thing. She had stopped correcting him sometime around year 3. On that Tuesday morning in August, she sat in the quiet office with a cup of coffee from the cart downstairs. Not Starbucks, just the no-name cart on 47th Street run by a man named Gerald, who always gave her an extra sugar without being asked. And she felt, for a moment, genuinely steady. Her phone showed 3 unread emails, a voicemail from her mother in Atlanta, a calendar reminder for her annual review next week. She didn't open any of them. She just looked at the rendering on her screen. Warm oak, linen walls, a single cashmere throw draped over the reading chair, and thought, I made something good today. She didn't know it was the last morning she would sit in that chair. She didn't know the email from HR had already been drafted. People who met Preston Whitfield III at a dinner party invariably liked him. That was the first thing Savannah had learned to understand, years too late, about the particular danger of men like him. They don't announce themselves. They arrive well-dressed, well-read, and with exactly the right amount of self-deprecating humor. They ask questions and listen to the answers. They remember small details. Your sister's name, the city where you grew up, the way you take your coffee. And they deploy those details at precisely the right moment to make you feel seen. Savannah had been 27 when she met him at a gallery opening in Chelsea. She had been wearing a borrowed dress and nursing a glass of wine she couldn't really afford, and standing in front of a piece she genuinely loved but couldn't begin to afford. Preston had stood beside her, looked at the same painting and said, "It looks like a conversation that hasn't happened yet." She had turned and looked at him. That was the beginning of the end. They married 18 months later at a small estate in Connecticut. His family's friends filled the pews. Her side was her mother, Domi, and 3 colleagues from Parsons. She had worn a dress she designed herself. Ivory silk. No train. Simple enough to move in. Preston's mother had looked at it and said graciously that it was very minimalist. The prenuptial agreement had been presented to her 11 days before the wedding. 43 pages. Preston's family attorney had handed it across a mahogany table with the practiced smoothness of someone who had done this many times before. "Standard procedure," Preston had said, "protects us both." She had signed without a lawyer present, 27 years old, in love, certain that people who love each other don't need to read the fine print. The agreement, she would later learn, ensured she left the marriage with nothing acquired during it. No shared assets. No claim on the apartment on East 74th Street. No portion of the investment account she had contributed to for 4 years. The HR director's name was Michelle Tran. She was 35, efficient, and visibly uncomfortable. She had asked Savannah to come in at 11 o'clock on a Wednesday morning, not 9 o'clock with the rest of the morning meetings, not 2 o'clock after lunch. 11 o'clock, which is the time companies choose when they want the conversation to be over before noon and forgotten before Friday. Savannah knew before she sat down. She recognized the folder on the desk, the box of tissues positioned just slightly too close to the visitor's chair. The way Michelle didn't quite make eye contact during the first 30 seconds. "We've made the decision to eliminate your position," Michelle said. "It's a restructuring, nothing performance-related." Savannah looked at the folder. "When?" "End of the month. You'll receive full severance per your contract. 6 weeks. 6 weeks. For 7 years of arriving before anyone else and leaving after everyone else. For 3 award-winning projects. For the Hargrove penthouse that had just been submitted for an AIA design citation. "Is there anything else?" Savannah asked. Michelle hesitated. Just briefly. Just enough. "No, I'm sorry, Savannah. I really am." She packed her desk in 40 minutes. 1 cardboard box. Her Parsons diploma. A small cactus she'd kept on the windowsill for 4 years. 2 design books, and a framed photo of her mother, taken on a beach in Savannah, Georgia, the city she had been named after. She didn't cry in the elevator. She didn't cry in the lobby. She walked out onto 47th Street, stood in the October air, and felt something she could not immediately name. Later, she would understand. It was the specific grief of watching a door close and knowing, not fearing, knowing, that the person who locked it was someone who had once told her he loved her. She had no proof. She never would. But she had sat across from Preston Whitfield for 6 years. She knew his handwriting even when he used someone else's pen. She walked to Central Park and sat on a bench near the Bethesda fountain for 2 hours. People walked dogs. Children ran past. The city continued, indifferent and enormous. The apartment in Astoria cost $1,650 a month. It was on the 3rd floor of a building with a buzzer that worked only sometimes, and a radiator that made a sound, like someone slowly dragging furniture across a hardwood floor every night at 2 o'clock in the morning. The kitchen window faced a brick wall. The closet was too small for the life she used to have. She had moved in with 2 suitcases, the cardboard box from her office, and $2,800 in a checking account that had once held considerably more, before the divorce settlement, before Preston's attorney had explained, with professional sympathy, exactly what the prenuptial agreement meant in practice. She set the framed photo of her mother on the kitchen counter, plugged in her MacBook Air, and sat on the floor because the furniture hadn't arrived yet. Then her phone rang. Atlanta area code. "Hi, Mom." Her mother's voice was thinner than last week. That was the thing Savannah measured now, the thickness of her mother's voice. It was a scale she had invented without meaning to. "The doctor moved my next treatment up," her mother said. "He wants to be more aggressive. He thinks it's the right call." "Good. That's good, Mom. The billing office called about last month's balance. I told them, I'll handle it." Silence. Then, "Savannah." "I said I'll handle it." After she hung up, she opened her banking app. The treatment balance owing was $4,400, and her account held $2,800. She had no freelance contracts, no prospects, no one in the industry she could call without risking word getting back to Preston's circle, which had become, over 6 years, most of the relevant industry. She sat on the floor of the Astoria apartment and did not allow herself the luxury of despair, not because she was strong, but because she had calculated, very precisely, that she could not afford the time it would take to fall apart. She opened a new document on her MacBook Air. At the top, she typed, "Things I still have." She stared at the blank space below it for a long time. Dominique Reeves showed up on a Saturday morning without calling first. This was not unusual. Domi had been showing up unannounced since their sophomore year at Parsons, so when she had appeared at Savannah's dorm room at 7 o'clock in the morning with a sketchbook, 2 coffees, and the declaration that the assignment due Monday is actually interesting, and I need someone to be awake with me. That was 17 years ago. The dynamic had never changed. She knocked twice, then let herself in with the spare key Savannah had given her the day she moved to Astoria. Not because Savannah asked her to have it, but because Domi had simply taken it, had a copy made, and handed the original back. "In case you lock yourself out," she had said. "Or in case I need to check on you." She was carrying a Starbucks cup in each hand, and a tote bag from which a corner of a book was visible. Women Who Run with the Wolves, the Clarissa Pinkola Estes edition with the worn spine, on which Domi had owned for 12 years, and lent out and retrieved so many times the cover had separated slightly at the binding. She set everything on the kitchen counter, looked at Savannah, and did not say, "Are you okay?" because Domi had always understood that question, asked too soon, is its own kind of cruelty. Instead, she said, "I have something for you, and you're not allowed to say no until I finish talking." The something was a project, not a large one, a redesign of the photo editorial space at Domi's agency in Soho. Small budget, tight timeline, the kind of work that wouldn't impress anyone at a gala, but would require Savannah to think again, to move through a real space with a real problem and find the solution that was already there, waiting. Also, Domi said, "I's opening her moleskin to a page with a name written at the top. I want you to meet someone. He's difficult. He's demanding. He has zero patience for anything that isn't exactly right." She slid the moleskin across the counter. The name on the page was Ethan Morse. Below it, Domi had written 4 words. "He's been asking about you." Morse plus Field Studio occupied the top 2 floors of a converted warehouse on Late Street in Tribeca. The kind of building that looked, from the outside, like it had no interest in impressing anyone. Raw concrete facade, no signage except a small brushed steel plate beside the door, but opened, on the inside, into something that stopped you mid-step. Exposed steel beams, northern light through floor-to-ceiling windows, the smell of drafting paper and coffee and something faintly cedar, and Savannah stood at the reception desk and understood, immediately, that whoever designed this space had done it for themselves. Not for clients, not for press photos, for the daily experience of the people who worked inside it. She respected that before she met him. Ethan Morse came down the interior staircase at 9:07, 7 minutes after their scheduled meeting time, which Savannah suspected was deliberate. He was tall, dark-haired, going gray at the temples, wearing a plain navy shirt with the sleeves pushed up. No jacket. No performance of the meeting. He shook her hand, looked at her directly, the kind of look that was less a greeting and more an assessment, and said, "Conference room, 2nd floor." Not, "Good to meet you." Not, "Thanks for coming." Just, "Conference room." She followed him upstairs. The conference room had a long oak table, 2 windows facing the Hudson, and a wall covered entirely in pinned drawings. Not finished renderings, but working sketches, the rough kind, full of corrections and second thoughts. Savannah's eye moved across them automatically. He noticed. "You can look at them after," he said. "Or not. Depends on how this goes." He sat down, opened a folder, and slid 3 photographs across the table toward her. An empty office floor on Park Avenue, raw space, nothing in it yet. "Caldwell Capital flagship," he said. 42,000 square feet. Completion in 7 months. The client's brief is 1 sentence. He tapped the photographs. He wants people to feel, when they walk in, not that the company has been here for 100 years and will be here for 100 more. Ethan leaned back and looked at her. "Tell me what you do." Savannah looked at the photographs for exactly 4 seconds. Then she started talking, and Ethan Morse didn't interrupt once. The article appeared on a Tuesday morning at 6:48 a.m. It was posted on Design Insider NYC, a blog with 30,000 followers in the architecture and interior design community, enough to matter, not enough to be dismissed as irrelevant. The headline read, "Questions emerge around former Aldridge plus Cole designer's portfolio." Savannah read it on her phone standing in the Astoria apartment kitchen, still in the clothes she'd slept in, coffee unmade. The piece was anonymous. It cited multiple sources familiar with the firm and alleged that 2 of Savannah's most celebrated projects, including the Hargrove penthouse, had involved significant conceptual contributions from senior colleagues that went unattributed. It named no one. It presented no documents. But it used enough specific internal details, project code names, client initials, meeting dates, that it appeared credible to anyone who didn't know better. Savannah's hands were steady as she read it. That was the thing about damage you've been half expecting. It doesn't shock you. It just arrives, and you have to decide in real time what to do with it. Her phone began ringing at 7:03. Domi first, then a former colleague, then a number she didn't recognize. She let them all go to voicemail. She opened her laptop instead and searched the article for the detail that would tell her what she needed to know. Not who wrote it, she already knew that, but how much damage it could actually do. The Hargrove project code name used in the piece, HG-14. That code had been assigned internally at Aldridge plus Cole. It was not public. It had appeared in exactly 3 documents, a project brief, an internal budget spreadsheet, and a single email chain between Savannah and the managing director. The managing director who had been Preston's golf partner for 11 years. She sat down. The morning light came through the kitchen window and hit the brick wall outside at a flat, gray angle. Somewhere in the building, someone was making breakfast. The smell of toast moved through the walls. Ethan's call came at 7:41. "I've seen the article," he said, without greeting. "Come in at 9. Bring everything." The call lasted 8 seconds. Savannah was already packing her bag before it ended. She arrived at Morse Plus Field at 8:51. Ethan was already in the conference room. The oak table had been cleared, except for a legal pad, a pen, and a printed copy of the Design Insider article, which he had annotated in the margins with a mechanical pencil in handwriting, so precise it looked architectural. He didn't stand when she came in. He gestured to the chair across from him. Savannah set her laptop bag on the table, sat down, and waited. Ethan looked at her for a moment, the same direct, assessing look she had learned over the past several weeks was simply how he processed things. He was not a man who performed emotions he wasn't feeling, which meant when he did show something, it was real. He slid the printed article toward her. "I'm going to ask you one question," he said. "Not whether you did this. I already know you didn't." She looked at him. "I'm asking, can you prove it? Completely. No gaps." Savannah opened her laptop. She had spent the 40-minute subway ride from Astoria organizing what she needed into a single folder. 7 years of working files, date-stamped sketches, email chains with clients that predated any alleged collaboration. The original hand-drawn concept for the Hargrove penthouse, done on a piece of drafting paper in her own apartment on a Sunday afternoon, photographed and emailed to herself the same evening at 11:22 p.m. Timestamps don't lie. That had been her father's saying. He had been an accountant in Savannah, Georgia, who believed in documentation the way other men believed in prayer. She turned the laptop toward Ethan and walked him through it, methodically, calmly, everything in order. He looked at the screen without speaking for 4 minutes. She counted. Then he picked up his pen, drew a single line through the article's headline, and set the pen down. "I'll call Caldwell's office this afternoon and let them know the situation has been reviewed internally, and there is no basis for concern." He stood, closed the conference room door, and looked back at her. "The Caldwell project continues on schedule. I need your revisions on the East Wing layout by Thursday morning." He said it as if the last hour had simply been a detour, and they were already back on the road. The leak happened on a Wednesday. Savannah found out on a Thursday evening. When Richard Caldwell's chief of staff called Ethan's direct line at 5:47 p.m. and used the word unacceptable loudly enough that Savannah, sitting 12 feet away at the drafting table, could hear it without trying. Ethan's expression didn't change during the call. It never did. But when he set the phone down, he was quiet for a long moment before he looked at her. "Did you tell anyone about the Caldwell project? Specifically, the scope, the Park Avenue address, the completion timeline?" Savannah thought about it for exactly 2 seconds. Then she knew. She called Domi from the stairwell. Domi answered on the second ring, and Savannah could tell from the half-second of silence before "hey" that she already knew why Savannah was calling. "Tell me what you said," Savannah said. Her voice was quiet. No, and that was always the tell with Savannah. Not loudness, but the particular stillness that came when something had hurt her. Domi had run into a journalist she knew, a lifestyle writer at a design publication, at a bar in the West Village the previous Friday. They'd had 2 drinks. The conversation had gone to mutual friends, then to work, then to Savannah. Domi had said nothing malicious. She had said, in fact, things that were meant to be kind, that Savannah was back, that she was doing serious work, that Caldwell Capital had made a smart choice. She had meant it as advocacy. The journalist had meant it as a scoop. "I was trying to help you," Domi said. Her voice had that particular texture of someone who knows they were wrong and knows that knowing it doesn't fix anything. "I know," Savannah said. "Savannah, I know. Domi." She stood in the stairwell for a while after she hung up. The building was settling into evening quiet. Somewhere above her, she could hear the distant sound of someone rolling a chair across a floor. She and Domi had been friends for 17 years. She had never once questioned it. But trust, she was learning. even the deepest kind, could be fractured by good intentions just as cleanly as by bad ones. She walked back into the studio and sat down without saying anything to Ethan. He didn't ask. He just slid her a fresh set of blueprints. Everyone had gone home by 9:30. The studio on Light Street was the kind of place that emptied quickly once the workday ended. Ethan ran a small team, 7 people, and none of them lingered unnecessarily. By 9:30, the lights on the lower floor were off, and the building had settled into the particular silence of a workspace at night. The hum of the HVAC, the distant sound of a delivery truck on the street below, the faint tick of the building contracting in the autumn cold. Savannah was still at the drafting table. The East Wing revision was due Thursday morning. It was now Thursday at 9:47 p.m., which meant, technically, due in 9 hours. She was close. She could see the solution. But there was a section near the elevator bank that was fighting her, a spatial problem she kept circling without landing on, and she had learned long ago that forcing these things only made them worse. So she sat, and she looked at the drawings, and she did not think about the $4,400 still owed on her mother's last treatment cycle. She did not think about the voicemail she had not yet returned. She did not think about Domi, who had texted 4 times since yesterday evening and received no reply. Her phone lit up on the table beside her. Atlanta area code. She picked it up. Her mother's voice was different tonight. Not weaker exactly, but smaller. The way voices get when a person is trying to sound fine and is not quite succeeding. "I just wanted to hear you," her mother said. "I'm here, Mom." They talked for 11 minutes. Her mother asked nothing about money. She asked about the work, about the city, about whether Savannah was eating properly. Savannah answered each question with the measured truthfulness she had learned to practice. Not lies, not the full weight of the truth. After she hung up, she sat without moving for a long time, and she didn't hear Ethan come back in. He had left 2 hours earlier. She had assumed for the night. He set a paper bag on the corner of the drafting table without a word. Thai food from the place on Greenwich Street. Then he placed beside it a folded piece of paper. She opened it. An address. A restaurant in the West Village. Below it, in his precise handwriting. Friday. 7 p.m. if you want. The email arrived on a Monday morning at 8:03 a.m. The subject line read, "Whitfield Foundation Gala, Annual Benefit, the Plaza Hotel." The body was 3 short paragraphs, formal, correctly punctuated, the language of someone who has had a personal assistant draft correspondence for so long that even their private emails sound like press releases. "Dear Savannah, I hope this finds you well. Onward. The Foundation's annual benefit will be held on the 14th at the Plaza. I wanted to extend a personal invitation, as I know how much these events meant to you during our time together. It would be good to see you in a setting like this again." No obligations, of course, simply a gesture of goodwill. Preston Savannah read it twice. Then she forwarded it to Domi, the first message she had sent since the leak, which Domi received and understood immediately for what it was. Not forgiveness exactly, but the door being opened a few inches. Domi called within 4 minutes. "Absolutely not," she said. "Do not go to that man's event. Do not give him the satisfaction of—" "He wants me to look like I don't belong there," Savannah said. "Exactly. So don't give him the audience." "Or," Savannah said, "I go, and I don't look like what he's expecting." Silence on the line. Then Domi, who had built an entire career on understanding narrative and image, said slowly, "What are you thinking?" That evening, Savannah mentioned the invitation to Ethan, not because she needed his permission, because she had learned over the past several weeks that he was the one person in her current life who told her the truth without softening it. He was reviewing structural drawings at his desk. He didn't look up immediately. When he did, he looked at her for a moment with that particular expression she had started to recognize, the one that wasn't quite professional and wasn't quite personal, and existed in the precise space between the two. "Do you want to go?" he asked. It was the right question. Not should you, or is it smart, or what will people think, but just, do you want to? "Yes," she said. "Then go," he said, and returned to his drawings. She stood there a moment longer than necessary before walking back to her desk. The dress had been Domi's originally. A midnight blue silk crepe gown, purchased 3 years ago for an awards ceremony that Domi had ultimately not attended because she'd been in Los Angeles finishing a pitch. It had hung in a garment bag in Domi's Soho closet since then, unworn, waiting for the right occasion, which in Domi's life kept failing to arrive. She had brought it to the Astoria apartment on a Thursday evening, laid it across Savannah's bed, and said, "Try it on." It was close. Not perfect. The neckline needed adjustment. The hem was a half-inch too long for Savannah's height. The waist sat differently on Savannah's frame than Domi's, which meant, by 10 o'clock, the two of them were on the living room floor with Savannah's sewing kit, making the dress into something it had never quite been before. They had barely spoken about the leak since it happened, but there is a particular kind of apology that doesn't use words. It uses presence, usefulness, the willingness to sit on a floor for 3 hours with pins in one hand and a seam ripper in the other. Domi was fluent in this language. Savannah received it. By midnight, the dress was finished. It was not what it had been. It was better. Savannah stood in front of the bathroom mirror, the only full-length reflective surface in the apartment, and looked at herself for a long time. Not with vanity, with something closer to recognition. "Don't wear anything around your neck," Domi said from the doorway. "See, the neckline is the statement. Don't compete with it." "Mom's earrings," Savannah said. Domi nodded. "Perfect." They sat up until 1 in the morning drinking tea at the small kitchen table, talking about things that had nothing to do with Preston Whitfield. Old Parsons professors, a film they'd both seen years ago, a road trip they'd planned in 2011 and never taken. Before Domi left, she paused at the door and said, "You're not going there to prove something. You're going because you exist. That's enough." After she was gone, Savannah's phone showed one new message. From Ethan. Sent at 12:56 a.m. 3 words. "Don't be late." Preston Whitfield III arrived at the Plaza at 6:15 p.m., 90 minutes before the gala began, because men like Preston understood that the evening started long before the guests. He moved through the pre-event setup with the ease of someone who had been in this room for 30 years of galas, who knew which waitstaff to acknowledge and which board members needed to be positioned near each other before the room filled. He had grown up in these spaces. They fit him the way certain clothes fit certain people, effortlessly, completely, as if they had been made for no one else. By 7 o'clock, his table was assembled. 7 of his closest associates, the word friends was not quite accurate for men in Preston's circle, where the relationships were built on mutual usefulness rather than genuine affection. They were people who appeared at the right events, said the right things, and understood intuitively that their proximity to the Whitfield name carried its own currency. It was Jonathan Reese who first brought up Savannah. "She's actually coming?" Jonathan asked. He kept his voice neutral, but Preston caught the edge in it. "She RSVP'd this afternoon," Preston said. He picked up his scotch, Macallan 18, neat, and turned it once in his hand. "I told you. She'll want to show the room she's fine, that she's moved on, that she doesn't need any of this." "And you think that's going to be embarrassing for her?" Jonathan said. "I think," Preston said, "that there's a difference between being fine and belonging here, and everyone in this room will see it immediately." He said it quietly, pleasantly even, the way he said most things that were meant to cut. Jonathan looked at his drink and didn't respond. The others at the table moved the conversation forward, and the moment passed, and the room began to fill, and the evening took on the specific rhythm of these events, the orchestrated casualness, the deliberate circulation, the performance of people who have been performing so long they no longer remember doing it. At 8:45, Preston positioned himself near the entrance. He checked his watch. A Rolex Datejust, inherited from his grandfather. He settled in to wait. He had no idea he was the one being watched. The car service Domi had arranged, a black Lincoln, not a limousine, which Savannah had specifically requested, pulled up to the Plaza's Fifth Avenue entrance at 8:49 p.m. Savannah sat in the back seat for exactly 30 seconds after the car stopped. Not from hesitation, but from the particular practice she had developed over the past 14 months of pausing before difficult things. Not to gather courage, which implied fear, but to return to herself. To feel the weight of her own body in the seat. The slight coolness of the evening coming through the door seal. The small, familiar weight of her mother's pearl earrings. Then she opened the door and stepped out. The October air met her, the specific Manhattan autumn that smelled of leaf damp and exhaust, and near the plaza, of something floral that drifted from the lobby. Her heels found the pavement. The midnight blue dress caught the light from the entrance canopy. Not sparkle, not shimmer, but a quiet depth, like looking into calm water. She walked through the entrance without pausing. The grand ballroom of the plaza, at full capacity, is a room designed to make you aware of your position within it. The Swarovski chandeliers, the gilded ceiling, the specific curvature of the space that makes sound travel in ways that feel almost deliberate, as if the room itself is listening. Savannah walked in at 8:52 p.m. She did not scan for Preston. She did not look for familiar faces. She moved into the room the way she moved through any space she had spent time understanding, with the quiet authority of someone who knows exactly what a room is made of. Richard Caldwell saw her from across the floor. He said something to the man beside him, set down his drink, and crossed the room. "Savannah," he said, extending his hand, "I was hoping you'd be here." That was the moment the room noticed. Not with applause. Not with theater. Just the collective, almost involuntary shift of attention that happens when a room recalibrates around a new presence. Ethan Morse, standing near the east windows with a glass of sparkling water, watched it happen. He had been at these events many times. He had never particularly enjoyed them. For the first time in a long time, he did not want to leave early. Preston found her at 40 minutes past 9. She was standing near the east side of the ballroom with Richard Caldwell and 2 members of his board, holding a glass of sparkling water. Not champagne. Caldwell's assistant had noted and matched, and talking about the spatial acoustics of the new Park Avenue office. She was mid-sentence when she saw Preston approaching in her peripheral vision. She finished her sentence. T. Caldwell glanced once at Preston's approach, something shifting briefly in his expression, and then said to Savannah, "Excuse me for just a moment." He stepped away with the particular discretion of a man who understands when to leave a stage clear. Preston stopped in front of her. The nod, the half-smile, the slight adjustment of his lapel, all of it so practiced it had become unconscious. He looked exactly as he had at 200 other events in 200 other rooms. Perfectly composed. Perfectly at ease. "Savannah," he said. "You look..." A pause. Perfectly timed. "Different. Not beautiful. Not well. Different." The word chosen to suggest change rather than arrival. She looked at him. This was the moment she had, in various forms, rehearsed and abandoned and rehearsed again over 14 months. She had imagined speeches, accusations, the perfect sentence that would rearrange the air between them. What she said instead was this: "Thank you for the invitation, Preston." That was all. said with the complete stillness of someone who has nothing left to prove to this particular person in this particular room. No heat behind it, no performance, just the truth of it, that she had come, that she was here, that his invitation had not been the point. Preston's smile stayed in place, but something behind it, some expectation of a reaction he had prepared for, didn't find what it was looking for. "I hope you've been well," he said. "I have," she said. Jonathan Reese, standing 6 feet away, heard every word of the exchange. He had also, earlier in the evening, heard Preston's table conversation. He stood very still and looked at his drink. The silence between Savannah and Preston lasted 3 seconds. Then Savannah said, "Enjoy your evening," and turned back toward Caldwell's table. Preston stood alone in the middle of the grand ballroom and did not know what to do with his hands. Jonathan Reese left the gala at 10:15. He walked out through the plaza's side entrance onto 58th Street, stood in the October air, and called his wife. She answered on the second ring, and he said, without preamble, "I need to tell you something I witnessed tonight." He was not a dramatic man. He was a corporate attorney who had known Preston Whitfield for 14 years. Through 2 firms, 1 divorce, and more favors than he could accurately count. He had laughed at things he shouldn't have laughed at. He had stayed quiet when staying quiet had been the easier choice. But there was something about watching Savannah Calloway walk into that room, and then watching Preston's face when she did, that had reconfigured something in him. Old discomfort, suddenly unavoidable. He didn't call a journalist. He didn't post anything. He simply told 3 people over the following 48 hours exactly what Preston had said before the gala and exactly how the room had responded when Savannah arrived. The 3 people told others. In a world where reputation is the primary currency, the movement of information does not require malice. It only requires accuracy. By the following Monday morning, Richard Caldwell had received 2 phone calls from separate board members of 2 different organizations, both referencing the same version of the same story. He listened to both calls without comment. Then he asked his chief of staff to pull the file on Whitfield Foundation's pending partnership proposal with Caldwell Capital. The proposal had been under consideration for 4 months. It represented $40 million in joint philanthropic investment over 5 years. Caldwell read through it once. Then he picked up the phone and called his attorney. The formal withdrawal letter was sent to Whitfield Foundation on Tuesday at 11 a.m. 2 days after the gala, the letter cited a reallocation of philanthropic priorities. No names, no accusations. Preston received it in his office on East 57th Street. He read it twice, then set it face down on his desk. He did not call Savannah. There was nothing to say to Savannah. She had done nothing, said nothing. She had simply arrived at a party she had been invited to. That was what he could not explain to himself. He had handed her the room. She had simply walked into it. The second withdrawal came from the Harmon Family Trust, a foundation that had supported Whitfield philanthropic efforts for 11 years. Margaret Harmon, its 73-year-old director, and the widow of its founder, called the Whitfield Foundation offices on a Wednesday morning. She asked to speak with Preston directly. When he came on the line, she said, "I've heard some things, Preston. I want you to know I don't make decisions based on gossip, but I also don't make decisions with my eyes closed." She asked him directly whether he had invited a former partner to a public event with the intent of humiliating her. Preston said, "That's a mischaracterization of yes or no, Preston." He did not answer. So Margaret Harmon thanked him for his time and ended the call. The trust's letter arrived the following day. The board meeting happened the week after that. His father, Charles Whitfield Sr., had built the foundation over 40 years. He was 81 years old, had survived 2 recessions and 1 federal investigation, and had the particular patience of a man who had waited out worse things than this. but he had spent 4 decades building the Whitfield name into something that meant something, and he was not willing to watch it become a punchline in other people's dinner conversations. He called Preston into his home office on a Saturday morning. Savannah was not mentioned by name. She didn't need to be. Charles Whitfield understood, without needing the full story, the shape of what his son had done. Not the dramatic version, but the pettier one, which was somehow worse. A man with every advantage using it not to build something, but to diminish someone who was already starting from nothing. "You will step back from the Foundation's board," his father said, "voluntarily, before anyone asks." Preston started to speak. "This is not a discussion," his father said. 3 days later, Preston Whitfield III issued a statement to the Foundation's communications director, citing personal priorities as the reason for his departure from the board. The statement was 2 sentences long. It was published on the Foundation's website at 4 p.m. on a Friday, the traditional graveyard slot for news that someone hopes will go unread. Most of the relevant people read it by Monday. The Mont Blanc pen he had carried in his vest pocket to the gala remained on his desk, for uncapped, for the rest of that week. She booked the flight to Atlanta on a Thursday evening, Delta, early morning, direct, and told no one except Domi, who responded with a single text, a small red heart, which from Domi was the equivalent of a paragraph. The Emory University Hospital was 40 minutes from the airport. Savannah took a rideshare through Atlanta morning traffic, watching the city move past the window, different from New York in every way, slower and greener, and shaped by sprawl rather than density, the kind of city that feels like it has room for things to breathe. Her mother's room was on the 4th floor, 412. Savannah had memorized the room number so thoroughly over the past year that she sometimes found herself counting to it, 412, in moments of stress. On subway platforms, and in the middle of difficult conversations, a private number that meant, she is still there. Her mother was sitting up when she arrived, reading a paperback, a mystery novel, the kind with a lighthouse on the cover, and wearing the pale blue cardigan Savannah had sent from a small shop in the West Village 2 months earlier. She looked thinner than in August, but her eyes were the same. They always would be. "You didn't have to come," her mother said. "I know," Savannah said. She set down her overnight bag, sat in the chair beside the bed, and handed over the envelope. The billing statement marked, "Paid in full, current through the next treatment cycle," with a note attached from the hospital's financial coordinator confirming 0 outstanding balance. Her mother looked at it for a long time. She didn't ask how. She didn't ask what it had cost. Not in money, but in the 14 months of early mornings and late nights, and the particular loneliness of rebuilding something in a city that doesn't pause to notice. She just reached over and took Savannah's hand. They sat like that for a long time. The television was off. The hallway outside was quiet except for the occasional sound of a cart passing. Through the window, Atlanta was doing what Atlanta does in October, the light going gold and soft across the low skyline. "Are you happy?" her mother asked eventually. Not about the money, not about the work. Savannah thought about it honestly. "I think I'm getting there," she said. The Caldwell Capital project was completed on a Thursday in November. Final walkthrough at 3 p.m. Richard Caldwell arrived with 2 board members. They moved through the space in near silence for 22 minutes, and at the end stood in the main reception area. Warm walnut millwork, limestone floors, a ceiling treatment that referenced the building's 1920s bones without imitating them, and said, "This is exactly what I asked for." He shook Ethan's hand. Then he shook Savannah's. "I'd like to talk about the Boston project," he said to her directly. "When you're ready." After he left, the studio team opened a bottle of wine someone had brought. Nothing expensive, just something cold, and stood around in the finished space for an hour, the way people do when a thing they built together is finally real. There was laughter. There was a reasonable amount of relief. Savannah sat on the edge of the reception desk, the desk she had specified, the stone she had selected, the proportion she had argued for through 3 rounds of revision, and felt the particular satisfaction of a thing done completely. Not perfectly, completely. By 6 o'clock, everyone else had gone. Ethan was at the long oak table reviewing the final documentation. He worked the way he always worked, focused, unhurried, present. She had come to understand, over the months they'd worked together, that this quality, his complete and undivided attention to whatever was in front of him, was the rarest thing about him. She started packing her bag. He looked up. "The Boston project," he said. "Caldwell will want an answer in 2 weeks." "I know," she said. "I want you on it," he said. "Officially. As a partner." She stopped packing. He said it the way he said most things, plainly, without decoration. But she had learned to read the language underneath his plainness, the things he communicated through precision rather than volume. "That's not just about the work," she said. He looked at her for a moment. "No," he said. "It's not." Outside the windows of the Tribeca studio, Manhattan was moving into evening, the lights coming up across the skyline, the Hudson going dark and silver, the city doing what the city always does, continuing forward, indifferent to individual stories, beautiful in its relentlessness. Savannah picked up her coat. Ethan picked up his. They walked out together. No announcement, no ceremony. Just 2 people leaving a building at the end of a long day, and neither of them in any particular hurry to say good night. The most dignified thing a person can do after being underestimated is simply continue. Adapted from Marcus Aurelius, Meditations, Book 6lius, Meditations, Book 6. If this story stayed with you, you already know why. Share it with someone who needed to hear it today.